Wizards are cool. A lot of people might say the wizards are just cowards too weak to pick up a sword, and there are times that they have a point, admittedly. That being said, when you have a wizard on your side who casts Fireball and wipes out an entire regiment of enemies in front of you, most people tend to conveniently forget how poorly they think of wizards most of the time, at least until the battle's ended. When the mage on your side has the ability to turn a mountain inside out before entombing you in whatever counts as his insides now, most people tend to at least wait a brief moment before running their goddamn mouth. That's not to say such mages are immune to criticism, it's just that at a certain level of power, it's kind of hard to make fun of them for being weak. Physically weak, maybe, but in terms of a more generic description of being powerful, well, let's just say that when it's being aimed at you, power word kill is not something you hear more than once. And with all that being said, I think it's high time I made a video about Teclis. A moment of your time before I begin speaking about an elf character for the next 15-ish minutes. Do you know another setting that has elves, and indeed what other game you can play right now that has plenty of elven champions to wield? Raid Shadow Legends! And while I've got some other things to talk to you about than elves, rest assured there's plenty waiting for you in the world of Raid. Valentine's season is upon us. The day might have passed, but the spirit is still in the air, mocking my single ass once again. But fret not, because Raid has some couples in its ranks that can boost your team's fighting ability with the power of love and brutal combat. Let me give you the top 3, chosen by me for an extensive list of criteria I've come up with. 1. Seducer and Temptress. Seducer can place damage reduction buffs on all allies and a block damage buff on top of it. Temptress can take an extra turn. Kind of a letdown, but her name is Seducer, so it still fits the Valentine theme. 2. Xavia and Bellinor. Aside from them being elves, so already the perfect couple, when they're on the same team, they unlock the ability to take up to 4 debuffs from one enemy and spread them around to the rest of the enemies. I don't know why, but that's insanely funny to me. Imagine if I just started throwing my diabetes at people. That's what I'm picturing. And 3. Siphi and Rhodos. When on the same team, this dynamic duo can not only reduce damage received from bosses, but remove all debuffs at the start of their turn. Is this why I picked them? Nah, I just like spooky ghosts. Sure, they're an effective combo to use, but ghosts are cool, and that's about all I needed to think about when placing them. Besides living vicariously through these power couples, you can get some goodies this Valentine's season. For new players, as long as you download Raid from my links below and head to raidlovequest.plarium.com and enter your player code, you can not only win Valentine-themed champions, but even up to $1,000 worth of Amazon gift cards through the minigames there. And if you're an existing player, fear not. Head to the same link where every player can find a promo code STValentine23 to get a nice little Valentine's Day gift just for you. The event is running until March 14th, so make sure you get on it. And one final thing just to sweeten the deal. While I try to decide if that was a Valentine's Day pun or not, if you use either my link in the description or the QR code you can see on screen extra big right now, you can get not only the epic champion Jotun, but several other goodies you can also see on screen, totaling to $35 worth of goods. Rewards are available for new players only, so download Raid now and I'll see you there. Alright, time to learn about the end-all, be-all of elven mages. Teclis is Tyrion's twin brother and a descendant of Anarion, a high elf who helped save the world by drawing a sword that almost every god on the planet was desperately telling him not to do. Even the Chaos gods. Because his great-great-great-a-lot-of-greats-grandpa pulled this sword, he and his brother are cursed. Tyrion got the curse in the form of being Gollum for the Sword of Cain. Meanwhile, Teclis was born with magical tuberculosis. Not kidding on that, by the way, it's described as consumptive, which is an old-timey word for the disease. Because of this, Teclis had 3 hobbies as a child. They were, in order, coughing himself into a coma, having Tyrion and their maid take care of him in between hunting trips and flirting with high elf women, and being experimented on by elven healing mages because if they accidentally killed him, there was always the other brother to keep the bloodline going strong. When they both came of age, it was time to go to Lothern and learn the tools of the high elf trade. Tyrion learned how to be a charismatic, friendly master of all forms of warfare. Teclis got to read some books and maybe learn how to cast magic missile if the effort wouldn't kill him. The greater demon of Slaanesh, Nakari, manifested to kill them both, and then Assyrian himself said nuh-uh and sent her ass back to the realm of chaos. Because sometimes it's okay for the good guys to get a deus ex machina, especially in a fantasy setting, because in those it's usually literal. Shortly after that, although we're talking about elves right now, so shortly after is anything from a week to several decades, Malekith and the Dark Elves decided that now was as good a time as any to invade Ulthuan again. I mean, they only have to win once, right? Tyrion and Alariel got into some deep shit pretty quickly, while Teclis was just kinda hanging out, doing his thing, you know? He had started taking magical potions to survive, and they helped him stand upright, so that was an uptick in his life. Then some people told him that surely Alariel and Tyrion were dead, and Teclis said, nah, they ain't. Not Tyrion, at least. They had a magical empathic link, because elven twins just get that, I guess, so he was entirely certain that they weren't dead. And because this was before the end times and established characters weren't being obliterated every few seconds, he was right. So Teclis made a pretty damn good sword for someone with 0 prior blacksmithing skills, and was given the War Crown of Saffrey, which is a fancy headpiece that makes some magic better. He went on a journey to find them, and he did. He also found who else but N'Kari, back at it again trying to kill the Everqueen and his brother. She was there because the Dark Elves decided that making deals with the goddess who wants nothing more than to eat elven souls was a good long-term arrangement. Then Teclis said power word kill, and much like I said earlier, N'Kari had enough time to go power word what before she was once again removed from this realm of existence. As thanks for the rescue, Alariel gave Teclis the Staff of Lilith, the goddess of magic. When he holds it, his magical tuberculosis goes away. Things just keep coming up Teclis. There was, of course, still a massive Dark Elf invasion they had to deal with, so Tyrion started cleaving his way through everything in his path while Teclis sat in the back going, I cast Chain Lightning every few seconds just to really make sure the Dark Elves appreciated trying to invade Ulthuan again. Alariel, meanwhile, she was there, I'm sure, doing something ever-queenly most likely. Malekith himself tried to intervene and take down Teclis, whereupon Teclis reignited the flames of Assyrian that burned him thousands of years ago. This slightly hurting him, Malekith decided to throw himself into the realm of chaos just to get away from Teclis. And then the rest of the Dark Elves and their chaos allies died, the end of that story. Or should I say, it was the end of the story for all the other High Elves. Because while most of them wanted to celebrate the narrow victory and Tyrion went to show Alariel his sword, and no I don't mean Sunfang, Teclis in a very un-elven move decided that perhaps helping others is actually a good thing to do. So he left Ulthuan to visit the Empire, because while Ulthuan was under siege from the Dark Elves, the Old World was going through the Great War against Chaos, and the ever-chosen before Archaon was busy giving it a good once-over. Thankfully, Magnus the Pious, also known as Chadnus the Pious, or yet another Warhammer fantasy character that makes Big E look like a clown, was a bit more open-minded about magic than most fellows. Together with him, Teclis set up the Colleges of Magic in the Empire of Man, allowing them to not only resist chaos a bit better, but actually throw some fireballs of their own around. Before that, human wizards were either crap or weren't allowed to exist at all, so this was a step up. Between this newfound strength and Magnus just generally being the best, chaos was pushed back. By this point, Teclis was pretty happy with what he had done and took a bit of a vacation. Of course, he's also a huge nerd, so his version of vacation was traveling around the world to see sites of magical power, learning about other cultures, and generally trying to fix the absolute mess that the Warhammer world was in at that point. He even went on an adventure with Gotrek and Felix. There are these magical tunnels that run through the Warhammer world that are in essence like the Webway but even trippier. You can see alternate realities in them as little bubbles, there's spooky voices in them, and a lot of the time those voices are actually demons. Teclis went to keep them from breaking down and also stop a pair of Tzeentch cultists from destroying Ulthuan, using these tunnels as a way to travel. Gotrek and Felix, meanwhile, almost literally tripped into the tunnels near Sylvania and met Teclis somehow. A contrived reason for a story? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but who cares, it's awesome. Naturally, Gotrek tried to kill Teclis, but because Felix was in some trouble, he held back. After Teclis rescued Felix, they went to Albion together, which is like England, but even worse. They met and chatted with the locals, and Teclis got himself a female bodyguard who was no doubt very interested in his own magical sword. For whatever reason, High Elven women kinda snub him a lot, but human women are ready to drop their pants the moment Teclis opens his mouth. If I had to guess, it's probably because he looks like Benedict Cumberbatch. Gotrek also debated letting the cultists win because it meant Ulthuan would sink, and that means a lot of dead elves, but thankfully smarter heads prevailed. Smarter heads being Felix, I should add, because when there's a dwarf, an elf, and a human in a fantasy story, the only reason the first two will work together is because a human is there to remind them to stop being morons. Then Gotrek murdered a giant and got back to the ground by firemen sliding down its ocular vein he ripped out of its skull. Teclis did fight two massively power Tzeentchian sorcerers while that happened, but when Gotrek is being Gotrek, it's hard for anyone else to be anything other than a footnote. After his miscellaneous travels, where he went pretty much everywhere the Warhammer world had to offer, Morathi tried to kill him with an assassination attempt. Didn't work, but it still hurt the guy. I like to think it went like it always did, and he got shanked with a knife before going power word kill, and then the Dark Elf went power word what before being obliterated. Also, if you're wondering, yes, I am imagining this happening like in Team 4-Star with the Kaioken joke. For a while after that, he just hung around Safari, doing magical research, filling up Lilith's boobs because they are blatantly a part of the staff he has, and occasionally going out into the world to lead the High Elves to victory. Occasionally meaning whenever someone played him in their Warhammer fantasy army. He was crowned High Lore Master after the last one died, and for a while, that was what Teclis was up to. There was also Storm of Chaos, where he showed up to help the Empire and obliterated Be'lakor and his entire army with a single spell, but that's neither here nor there. Before I start talking about the end times and get upset, let's talk about Teclis himself a bit. As you might have figured out, he's a lot friendlier towards other races than most High Elves are. Mankind specifically, he thinks is intertwined with the fate of the High Elves, and if man falls, then the Elves go down with them. So I imagine most people that don't like Elves are going to be at least a little bit more favorably inclined towards the guy. Beyond that, he approaches his life with a rather good amount of humor. At the end of the Gotrek and Felix book he appeared in, he sarcastically thinks to himself about how he saved the world and now has to find his way through hordes of orcs and chaos difficult is to get home. Just another day in the life of Ulthuan's most unappreciated hero. He's also shown to have some doubts about himself. In the same book, he wished that Tyrion were in the situation instead of himself, mainly because the sheer amount of charisma cascading off Tyrion like a waterfall of friendliness would have diffused things no problem. I don't think he's giving himself enough credit, but at least he's kinda humble. And to throw my 2 cents in, he's very much right about understanding that the elves need mankind and vice versa. That very line of reasoning was why he set up the magical colleges in the Empire. And once again, to go to Gotrek and Felix, Teclis and Felix were discussing the nature of the world and how the Old Ones set it up. Felix makes a suggestion that Teclis finds to be highly intriguing, and he tells Felix as much. It's not something like him going, yeah, that's a stupid idea, and then it cuts to Teclis fervently writing down the idea for later. He just straight up tells Felix, yeah, that is an awesome idea. Granted, when Felix asks to be kept up to date on any findings Teclis makes on the idea, Teclis tells him that his human lifespan means he'll likely be long dead before he comes to any kind of conclusion, but still, for an elf, that's some real humility. Alright, end times time now. It's a Warhammer fantasy character, we have no choice but to go here. Even more so with Teclis, because spoiler alert but not really, he shows up in AOS quite a bit. Teclis has apparently been taking lessons from Eldrad and orchestrates a phenomenally massive amount of shit to keep the elves and world at large alive. He gets Tyrion and Alariel's daughter Aliathra sacrificed to bring back Nagash because he figured they'd all need his help to fight back chaos. Major dick move, but at least I can see the logic in that one. He gets the Phoenix King Finnabar killed when it's revealed that Malekith was the true Phoenix King all along. For real, guys, seriously. This one is just straight up awful retconning, but at the very absolute least to give Teclis some credit, going under the assumption that this is true, then it's not the worst idea he's had to get Malekith in charge. It's completely stupid from the standpoint of us reading about the setting because it's just blatantly GW ruining established lore, but somewhat understandable in-universe. Also, yeah, I'm gonna fight you on this, Eli. Malekith is not the true fucking Phoenix King. He also comes with a plan to harness the winds of magic into 8 individuals known as incarnates, all of whom are elves because Teclis may have accepted humans are necessary for survival, but he's not about to give them unlimited magical power. This plan goes pretty badly. Morathi and Tyrion screw it up, and what ends up happening is that he binds the Wind of Light to his staff and the Wind of Life to Alariel, as was intended. Malekith gets shadow instead of fire like he was supposed to, and all the rest of the winds are just out in the wild somewhere, and as far as Teclis knows, they could have possessed a particularly aesthetic rock. Also, the vortex is unbound, and Ulthuan sinks into the ocean. Big L for the High Elves. Then we flash forward into the end times. Teclis proposes an alliance with Nagash, which everyone hates, but they're somewhat willing to do it. Nagash tells him to go to hell, but then does it later himself so he can claim that he had the idea and not Teclis. Teclis rips out the flame of Ulrich from underneath Middenheim to revive Tyrion after he got killed for being angry over his daughter being murdered and his entire country seemingly betraying him for their sworn enemy. God, Tyrion, don't overreact, it wasn't that big a deal. This action not only dooms Middenheim to fall to Archaon's hordes, not only gets rid of one of the only remaining gods actively holding back chaos, but also allows Archaon access to a third portal of the Old Ones that was underneath Middenheim and giving him a very convenient way to destroy the world once and for all by turning it on. This is not only stupid in-universe, it's stupid out-of-universe. I hate the end times. Sorry, that's just a verbal tick of mine I get whenever I discuss the end times. I hate the end times. Funnily enough, Ulrich possesses one of his followers with a little strength he has left and calls out Teclis on his bullshit. Teclis tells him to his face that the Age of Gods is over, which would have been an absolutely stone-cold badass line to say directly to a god's face if the rest of the end times didn't happen. Teclis teleports all the incarnates to Middenheim, but he screwed it up and they just kinda teleport all over the place without any organization. Teclis lands at Archaon's feet. Very unfortunate. He makes fun of him, and then Archaon punches him in the face and knocks his lights out. Eventually, he meets up with the other incarnates, and together they start trying to enact one last ritual to save the world. Oh, but before that, he teleported Grimgor Ironhide and his entire army consisting of every orc and ogre left in the world to Middenheim. Now that would be a real convenient spell to have in D&D. 9th level spell called Summon Orc and Ogre, and it just makes every single one of them in the campaign magically appear there if they fail a spell save or something. I'm sorry, I'm going off topic to avoid having to keep talking about the end times. Anyways, the ritual was working until one of the incarnates died, so Teclis took that guy's power into himself on top of the one he already had in his staff. This starts tearing him apart, but he holds it together long enough that it looks like the ritual will work. And then Manfred von Karstein stabs Balthasar Gelt in the back. I've mentioned it before on this channel, but every time I come across a chance to cover this bit of lore, I can't help but emphasize it. Just because of how much of a stupid, arrogant, treacherous little weasel Games Workshop was here. Sorry, did I say Games Workshop? I meant Manfred. Regardless, Teclis tries to take Gelt's Wind of Metal into him on top of the other two, but if 2 winds were causing him trouble, then 3 was definitely not a good idea, and he explodes. He died right before the end of the world, and right before Tyrion avenged him by giving Manfred a prostate exam using Sunfang. And then suddenly, Age of Sigmar. Teclis is a god now, and he no longer requires magical potions and a special staff to stay alive. And to top off even all that, he found Tyrion after just a little bit of searching around. Tyrion was also a god, and was blind because he got into a staring contest with a spirit that embodied the very concept of light and wasn't about to puss out of a challenge, but he could see through Teclis' eyes. So thankfully they've not only mostly forgiven each other, but Teclis isn't the same kind of god as Zeus is, otherwise things would get real awkward for Tyrion. It'd be real awkward if the person giving you eyesight was someone you hated, even more awkward if every time you opened your eyes, or their eyes I guess, they were porking someone as a swan. After this, they found Malekith and Marathi. Malekith decided to fuse with this dragon or something, because he's a scaly now. With their help, they came together to beat the snot out of Slaanesh and reclaimed elf souls from the end times. And while I cannot confirm this, because for the life of me I can't find the original passage containing this lore, I have read online that there's a possibility that some of these elven souls are perhaps a bit more alien than they should be. Indeed, given that the warp is the warp, some of the souls taken from Slaanesh may not be elves, but Eldar. Or that's just something someone made up, and I'm parroting garbage back at you. I'm gonna consider it canon either way, because I think it's funny when the settings interact, and all the hype/outrage such a thing causes. Now, since I've covered Teclis a bit in the Lumineth faction video, I'll keep his AOS lore relatively brief since I was just talking about it. Teclis tried to recreate the High Elves, failed and made the emo Ideneth instead, failed a couple more times, and then eventually created the Lumineth Realm Lords. He also made a bunch of things called Enlightenment Engines to speed up development in all the mortal realms, since he's always been about cooperation between everyone. Sigmar secretly dicked around with them a bit, but Teclis doesn't seem to mind too much if he's aware of it. Or he's picking and choosing his battles since he has enough to deal with already. The Lumineth did the funny fall of the Eldar thing, only not quite as catastrophic, so Teclis talked to the moon for a month, and when he came back, he changed their entire society. Might seem a bit drastic, but they were kind of going through the apocalypse, so I understand they were willing to try anything. He then went to work solving all of the major problems the mortal realms faced at the moment, because he is an elf and naturally knows best. He made sure that the Necroquake only kind of catastrophically damaged the Lumineth and Hysh, and then proceeded to fight Nagash. Can you take a guess what unoriginal joke I'm going to make again?
Power word kill!
Power word what? Granted, Nagash is the god of the dead, so it didn't, kill him, but it did its job well enough. The fight crippled Teclis, sure, but like I said in the Lumineth video, that's just a return to form. It's hard to argue he's weakened because I know what he was like in fantasy, and he's sure as hell still doing better than there. Something also evidently happened to him where he had to split his soul in half and the other half is just gone, but honestly, I still think he's in a better place than fantasy. He helped Alariel dispel the death magic across reality, and he's been meditating on how to fix the rampaging beast energies and similarly rampaging hordes of destruction that have been making things slightly difficult for everyone. As I said before, the Lumineth greatly respect him, but find it more productive to just talk to the moon spirit he travels with, and as I also said before, I still find this to be incredibly funny. Sorry, God, but I have better sources of information to draw from. After all, Teclis' source is Selenar, but Selenar's source is I made it up. And as we all know, I made it up is the end-all be-all of sources. Before I do his do or don't, I'd like to briefly talk about something I desperately want to see regarding Teclis. I want him to once again meet Gotrek. Oh, so badly. I want Felix to come back more than that, but holy hell was it funny seeing them interact in the Gotrek and Felix book he's in. Gotrek scared the ever-loving shit out of him. Granted, it was partially because they were in these weird magical tunnels and Teclis didn't want to go all out in case he collapsed reality around them, but the point still stands that this one particularly angry dwarf scared someone who can blow up cities if he wants to. I want Gotrek to hear about how that one elf he reluctantly helped all those years ago is apparently a god now, show up in Hysh, and just cause the biggest scene possible. Just start demanding for help finding Felix, or where to find his old axe. Or even just start complaining about how the mortal realms must be truly horrid if some stupid elf from their stupid little island is what passes for a god nowadays. I'm imagining Gotrek ranting in the middle of the public square in Settler's Gain or something, and a bunch of Lumineth are confused why their god is not only preventing them from arresting him, but looks utterly terrified at the thought of them actually trying to apprehend this one annoying dwarf. He knows damn well Gotrek would rip out his tongue before he can finish saying power word kill. Alright, do or don't Teclis. Lore positives, he is the god of the Lumineth. So if you want your army to be led by the faction leader, it's hard to go higher up the chain of command than God. I'm pretty sure Tyrion technically outranks him as a deity in Hysh, but Tyrion doesn't have a mini yet. If you want a wise leader to command your army, it's hard to get wiser than Teclis. You might say Selenar is the one who ultimately is behind the Lumineth society as it is, but Teclis is the one who sought the spirit out. And if nothing else, he's always been about the cooperation between the different races to fight back the evils of the world, which in terms of Warhammer is the pinnacle of wisdom. And yet, as I've hopefully made clear, if you want a character character with some vulnerabilities to them and one who isn't just a Mary Sue, Teclis is perhaps the ultimate choice in that regard. He's humble for who and what he is, and he even feels inadequate sometimes even as of Age of Sigmar. At one point during AOS, he has flashbacks to his time in Firm in Bed while Tyrion was being the best elf ever. He was a mage bar none even before he became a god, but he's always has some edges to his character that really flesh him out. And of course, he's one of the good guys in Age of Sigmar. While the Lumineth may or may not have some spicy mind control stuff going on, Teclis doesn't appear to be a part of it. He's always been about cooperation between men, elves, and dwarfs if they'll bother listening, and at least from what I've gathered, Teclis is behind any of the 1984 crap the Lumineth are pulling. He even helped bring the mortals in AOS up to speed with his Enlightenment engines, and that wasn't something he necessarily did because it benefited him. It seems like he just wanted to help. And now rules positives. I mentioned before in the Lumineth video his spell casting shenanigans, but I'll briefly go over it again since this is his video now. If you cast one spell, you get a guaranteed value of 12 and it cannot be unbound. If you cast 2, guaranteed value of 12. If you cast 4, guaranteed value of 10. As you'd expect, he's got some serious magical firepower. And of course, automatically unbind one endless spell and one enemy spell. Nagash rocking up with the Hand of Dust? No, he isn't. Chaos Sorcerer is about to unleash the might of Tzeentch upon the Lumineth? No, they aren't. I'd put good money on him being able to out-magic Magnus the Red, truth be told. If you think those are the only things about him I covered last time because it's all he has to offer, then you're solely mistaken. If they're within range of his aura of Selenar ability, add 1 to casting, dispelling, and unbinding rolls for all Lumineth mages. You might think this requires you to build an army solely based around the wizard units, but then you remember that the basic Lumineth infantry is a wizard unit. The range is anything from 16 inches to 6, depending on how far down his damage table he is. 6 inches isn't great, but by the time he's down there, you've more than likely gotten plenty of use out of the ability. He can also give everything within 18 inches of him a 5-up ward save. I like how the rules say if successfully cast, as if it is physically possible for him to not cast the spell. I mean, I guess if you aren't doing the one spell guarantee, someone can unbind it, but even then they have to try to unbind it, whereas you just go, this is happening now. Oh, and if a unit within that aura of his is affected by either a spell or endless spell, you just roll yourself a dice, and on a 4-up they not only aren't affected by the spell, but can then pick an enemy unit in range and give them D3 mortal wounds. Just to be a prick. Oh, and he knows spells from 3 different lores, as in all of the spells from 3 different lores, not including the ones he already knows on his character sheet. In melee range, he's no slouch either, with his Sword of Teclis having a pretty damn nice kick to it, and Selenar being able to maul fools to try to take them on. Not the best, but definitely not the worst. As for his tankiness, it's respectable. Again, not the best by a long shot, but he's pretty beefy for a wizard. 16 wounds and a 4-up save means that unless you get absolutely obliterated by both bad rolls and everything the enemy has to offer, Teclis will be sticking around for at least a few turns. And as for his movement, 10 movement is solid. Not the best within the Lumineth or in general, but he can also fly, so if he's really got to get out of a sticky situation, it shouldn't be too hard. As for the lore cons of Teclis, by playing him, you are playing someone at least in part responsible for the world ending. So Teclis doesn't necessarily have the best track record. Prior to that, he'd been doing pretty alright, but that's the kind of black mark that kind of takes up most of a permanent record. Also, if you're the kind of person who really likes making up a narrative and making a story out of your game in general, there's 2 things to keep in mind about Teclis. One is that as one of the gods of Hysh, he's not going to be involving himself in some low-level skirmish. He's going to be fighting in the most realm-shaking battles, not some goblin raid in the middle of nowhere. 2, if you lose the battle, you have probably doomed Hysh and the Lumineth, so try not to do that, yeah? Truth be told though, that's kinda all I got for his lore cons. I like Teclis, so it's hard for me to come up with bad things to say about the guy. Maybe it's because in fantasy he had to take potions on the daily to survive, and that's not a far shot away from insulin. As for tabletop though, here we go. He is, despite his toughness, still a mage. So my usual caveats of not 1v1ing someone like Gotrek or Archaon in a fight apply here as well. Even other characters that aren't one of those can put hurt on him in range. If Gordrak gets on top of you after he butchered his way through your wardens, you're in danger. And if the Celestin Prime is put in reserve and then Deep Strike's right next to him, it's not going to be looking good for Teclis, especially given that Karl Franz has quite the amount of guaranteed mortal wounds he can cause. He's certainly tanky for a wizard, but the key thing to take from that phrase is for a wizard. Don't let the free guilds line up the artillery against him, because it's gonna hurt. And of course, his price. In the real world, he costs $170 US. That's a lot of money. In-game, he costs 700 points. That's not quite as pricey as Nagash is, but it's enough points that if you're taking Teclis in your army, there's decent odds that you're building your army entirely around Teclis. For reference, the second most expensive unit the Lumineth has is worth 440 points. If he gets killed earlier or before you can get use out of him, it's very likely going to cost you the game. On top of that, 700 points means that you do not have much room for other units, even in larger games. If you only want to use Teclis as a source of DPS, you can probably find better options, at least in terms of pricing. With the big cow monster, even if you include a stone mage to support it, you're still going to have over 100 points more than if you'd taken Teclis. Eltharion not only hits harder in melee, but despite having less wounds, he's tankier because he has a higher save and halves melee and missile damage. And if you're fighting Chaos, Lyriel Uthrali isn't bad at all because he does more damage to them with his Demonbane weapon, as well as only being 170 points. So if you want balls to the wall magic, you want Teclis. But if you want to lean a bit more into the traditional warfare with the Lumina, there's a lot of options that are probably going to suit you more than he does. But wait, I'm not done, because Teclis is in Total Warhammer, baby. He is a fantastic wizard, if not the best in the game, then top 3 easily. Much like he did in lore, he can just vomit out Chain Lightning. He can also unlock all of the 8 Winds of Magic's passive special abilities, which means every time he casts a spell, he buffs his army and debuffs the enemy. As for how I recommend using Teclis, it's very simple. Download the Recruit Defeated Legendary Lords mod, because playing an actual campaign as Teclis is suffering. As is well known, he was part of the Lustria Thunderdome in Warhammer 2. In Mortal Empires, he had no one to confederate with in Lustria, and almost everyone there either wanted to kill him or was a lizardman going to capture settlements he wanted. If you tried to declare war on them and take them back, the lizards would come together to beat the shit out of you, assuming Harkon or Lokir hadn't already been doing that. In Immortal Empires, Creative Assembly decided to fix this problem by moving him to the Southlands. Instead of fighting pirates, rats, and lizards, he now gets to fight Kairos Fateweaver, Skarbrand, Manfred von Karstein, and pretty much the entire Tomb Kings faction. This is of course in addition to all sorts of minor factions of rats and lizards. Don't worry though, if you pick him, you get Oxyotl nearby, so rest assured, while Tzeentch demons are cheesing you with their Halo energy shield and Skarbrand is sending you to Khorne personally, a chameleon will be taking potshots at them in between your face-pounding sessions. Just download the damn mod and play Tyrion or someone. That way when Teclis inevitably bites it, you can defend Ulthuan with him or something. Fuck man, at least Aletha Nar is mostly just fighting Dark Elves, not every variety of nasty in the Warhammer world except for Slaanesh demons. I forgot about all the Slaanesh demons down here, so you know what? I lied about the last part. You fight everything. So that's Teclis of the White Tower, or any number of accolades you could give the guy. Pretty cool dude. Shame his role in life is to fix everyone's problems before getting kicked in the ribs for the 10th time that week. He's kinda like if the Lamenters were a single person now that I'm thinking about it. Not a one-to-one comparison, but he's about as lucky as they are. Nah, I take that back. Felix is if the Lamenters were one dude. Either way, time to wrap up. As always, thank you to my wonderful channel members. You are the Teclis to my rest of the Warhammer world, keeping me going through the coming storm. I hope that none of you have tuberculosis, because otherwise that comparison is going to be a bit dark. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. For being a masterful wizard, you'd think Teclis would invest more into healing spells. I get that high magic is supposed to be the ultimate form of magic, but seriously, even if it never cured his curse, it would have at least helped when he was blocking arrows with his face for the 1000th time. Seriously, dude, at least carry some band-aids around with you.